The morning mist hung heavy over the cobblestones of revolutionary Paris as October 1793 dawned grey and merciless. In the depths of the Conciergerie prison, a woman who had once commanded the most opulent court in Europe now sat shivering on a straw mattress, her once golden hair shorn and matted, her pale hands trembling not from cold but from the weight of what she knew was coming. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian princess who had become France's most hated queen, was about to face her final days in conditions so deliberately degrading that they would strip away every last vestige of royal dignity before the guillotine claimed her life. The story of what truly happened to Marie Antoinette in those last 76 days has been sanitized by centuries of romanticized retellings. Popular imagination has crafted a narrative of noble suffering and graceful martyrdom, but the reality was far more brutal and systematically cruel. The revolutionary government didn't simply want her dead, they wanted her destroyed, humiliated, and reduced to something less than human before the crowds of Paris. What they subjected her to was not merely imprisonment, but a calculated campaign of psychological torture designed to break her spirit completely before her body met the blade. To understand the full horror of Marie Antoinette's final ordeal, we must first grasp the revolutionary fervour that had consumed France by 1793. The woman who had once been dismissed as a frivolous queen obsessed with fashion and parties had become the embodiment of everything the revolution sought to destroy. She represented not just monarchy, but foreign interference, aristocratic excess, and the perceived betrayal of French interests. The revolutionaries needed her death to serve as more than simple execution. It had to be a ritual purification of the nation itself. The Conciergerie, where Marie Antoinette spent her final months, was deliberately chosen for its symbolic weight. This medieval fortress had served as a royal palace before becoming Paris's most notorious prison. The irony was intentional. The woman who had lived in Versailles would die in the very foundations of French royal power, now transformed into a monument to revolutionary justice. The prison's damp stone walls had witnessed centuries of suffering, and Marie Antoinette would become its most famous victim. Her cell measured barely 8 feet by 6 feet, a cramped space that had once housed common criminals and political prisoners alike. The revolutionaries ensured that every detail of her confinement would contrast sharply with the luxury she had known. Where once she had slept in silk sheets beneath painted ceilings, she now lay on mouldy straw. Where crystal chandeliers had once illuminated her evenings, a single candle now provided the only light against the perpetual darkness of her underground prison. The systematic humiliation began immediately upon her arrival. Guards stripped her of the few remaining possessions that connected her to her former life, leaving her with only the most basic clothing. Her famous, elaborate hairstyles, once the envy of European courts, were roughly cut away, leaving jagged remnants that served as a daily reminder of her fallen status. The revolutionaries understood that dignity was as much about appearance as behavior, and they methodically destroyed every aspect of her physical presentation that had once commanded respect. More insidious than the physical degradations were the psychological torments carefully orchestrated by her captors. Guards were instructed to treat her with deliberate disrespect, addressing her not as Your Majesty or even by name, but simply as the Widow Capet, a reference to the ancient Capetian dynasty that stripped her of even her married identity. This linguistic violence was designed to erase her very sense of self, reducing a woman who had once been the most powerful female figure in Europe to a nameless symbol of defeated aristocracy. The prison routine was structured to maximize her discomfort and anxiety. Meals arrived irregularly, consisting of coarse bread and thin soup that bore no resemblance to the elaborate cuisine she had once enjoyed. The food was often cold by the time it reached her cell, served on dirty wooden bowls by guards who took visible pleasure in her reduced circumstances. Water was rationed, making basic hygiene nearly impossible and adding another layer of degradation to her daily existence. Sleep became elusive in the damp, cold cell where rats scurried across the floor and the sounds of other prisoners echoed through the stone corridors. The straw mattress provided little comfort against the hard floor, and the single blanket offered insufficient protection against the autumn chill that seeped through the ancient walls. Guard changes occurred at unpredictable hours, ensuring that just as she might begin to rest, new voices and footsteps would jolt her back to wakefulness. The interrogations began almost immediately, conducted by revolutionary officials who saw her not as a person but as a symbol to be broken. These sessions, held in chambers barely lit by flickering candles, subjected her to hours of hostile questioning about her alleged crimes against the French people. The accusations ranged from treason and conspiracy with foreign enemies to the more absurd charges of corrupting French morality through her lifestyle. Each session was designed not to elicit information, but to wear down her resistance and force her to confront the hatred that now surrounded her. Revolutionary propaganda had transformed Marie Antoinette into a figure of almost supernatural evil in the popular imagination. Pamphlets circulated throughout Paris depicting her as a foreign spy, a sexual deviant, and a vampire feeding on French blood. These libels, many too obscene to repeat, created an atmosphere where any cruelty inflicted upon her seemed justified. The prison guards, steeped in this revolutionary mythology, treated her with a casual brutality that reflected their genuine belief that she represented everything wrong with the old regime. The denial of privacy became another weapon in the arsenal of humiliation. Guards were stationed inside her cell around the clock, watching her every movement with undisguised hostility. Even the most basic human needs became public spectacles, as she was forced to perform bodily functions under constant observation. This violation of fundamental dignity was carefully calculated to break down the psychological barriers that separated her from complete despair. Letters from family members were intercepted and often destroyed before reaching her, cutting off the emotional support that might have sustained her spirits. When correspondence did arrive, it was heavily censored, with passages that might provide comfort or hope carefully excised. The revolutionaries understood that isolation was as powerful a weapon as any physical torture, and they worked methodically to sever every connection that might remind her of her humanity. The approaching trial cast its shadow over every moment of her imprisonment. Unlike the relatively quick proceedings that had condemned her husband, Marie Antoinette's legal ordeal was designed to be prolonged and public, maximizing both her suffering and the revolutionary spectacle. Court documents revealed that the outcome was predetermined. She would die regardless of any defense. But the process itself served the important function of providing legal justification for what was essentially political murder. Her physical health began deteriorating rapidly under these poor conditions. The combination nutrition, inadequate sleep, constant stress, and the damp prison environment took a visible toll on a woman who had once been renowned for her beauty and vitality. Contemporary accounts describe her hair turning completely white within weeks, her face becoming gaunt and hollow, her hands developing a persistent tremor that betrayed her inner turmoil. Medical attention was deliberately limited and often withheld entirely, as revolutionary authorities saw no reason to preserve the health of someone marked for death. When she fell ill, which happened frequently given the horrible conditions, treatment consisted of the most basic remedies administered with obvious reluctance. The message was clear. Her life had value only insofar as it could serve the revolution's purposes, and those purposes required her to survive just long enough to face public execution. The psychological warfare extended to deliberately unpredictable treatment. Some days guards might show unexpected courtesy, raising her hopes that conditions might improve, only to return to cruel indifference or active hostility the following day. This emotional manipulation kept her in a constant state of anxiety, never knowing what to expect and unable to develop coping mechanisms for consistent treatment. The revolutionary authorities understood that breaking Marie Antoinette required more than physical discomfort. They needed to destroy her sense of identity at its very core. The woman who had once presided over elaborate court ceremonies now found herself subjected to deliberate inversions of royal protocol designed to maximize humiliation. Where courtiers had once approached her with deep bows and reverent whispers, prison guards now burst into her cell without warning, shouting crude jokes and revolutionary slogans that mocked everything she had once represented. The timing of these intrusions was carefully orchestrated to prevent any semblance of routine or dignity. Just as she might begin to find moments of quiet reflection or prayer, guards would arrive to conduct unnecessary searches of her meager possessions, roughly handling the few items she was permitted to keep. These searches served no security purpose, but fulfilled the important revolutionary function of reminding her that she possessed nothing, not even the most basic privacy, that could not be violated at will. The sounds of the prison became instruments of torture in themselves. The conciergerie housed dozens of other prisoners awaiting their own appointments with the guillotine, and their cries, prayers, and final agonies echoed through the stone corridors day and night. Marie Antoinette could hear the footsteps of guards coming to collect other condemned prisoners for their final journey, knowing that each departure brought her own execution closer. The revolutionary authorities ensured that she was aware of every execution, sometimes forcing her to listen to detailed accounts of how her fellow prisoners had met their ends. More calculated was the psychological torture inflicted through forced exposure to revolutionary propaganda. Guards would read aloud from newspapers and pamphlets that detailed the ongoing destruction of everything she had once held dear. Reports of churches being desecrated, nobles being executed, and royal symbols being torn down were delivered with obvious relish, each piece of news designed to reinforce her complete powerlessness to prevent the obliteration of her world. The revolutionaries also employed a particularly cruel form of hope manipulation. Occasionally, guards would hint that powerful foreign allies might be working to secure her release, or that political circumstances might be changing in her favor. These false hopes were deliberately cultivated only to be brutally crushed, creating cycles of emotional elevation and devastation that served to break down her psychological defenses more effectively than consistent cruelty might have achieved. Her captors understood that maintaining some connection to her former identity might provide psychological strength, so they worked systematically to sever every link to her past life. Portraits of her children were confiscated and destroyed before her eyes. Religious items that might provide spiritual comfort were removed or defiled. Even her wedding ring, one of the last tangible connections to happier times, was eventually taken, leaving her fingers as bare as her cell walls. The degradation of her personal hygiene became another weapon in the arsenal of humiliation. Access to washing facilities was severely limited, and when permitted, she was forced to use cold water and harsh soap that left her skin raw and irritated. Her once lustrous hair, already roughly shorn, became increasingly matted and dirty as weeks passed without adequate care. The contrast between her current appearance and the elaborate grooming rituals of Versailles was deliberately maintained as a constant reminder of her fall from grace. Revolutionary officials took particular pleasure in forcing her to confront the hatred of ordinary French citizens. Windows of her cell faced a courtyard where crowds would sometimes gather, shouting obscenities and death threats that carried clearly through the stone walls. These demonstrations were not spontaneous, but carefully orchestrated events designed to show her the depth of popular animosity and the futility of any hope for rescue or reprieve. The manipulation extended to her meals, which became irregular not through oversight, but as deliberate policy. Sometimes food would arrive at unexpected hours, disrupting any attempt at maintaining normal rhythms of daily life. Other times, meals would be skipped entirely, leaving her to wonder whether this omission signaled some change in her fate or simply represented another casual cruelty. The uncertainty was the point, keeping her constantly off balance and unable to establish any sense of control over even the most basic aspects of existence. Prison authorities also employed what might be called anticipatory torture, constantly discussing the mechanics of her upcoming execution in her presence. Guards would speculate about how sharp the guillotine blade was, how long consciousness might persist after beheading, and whether she would show courage or cowardice on the scaffold. These conversations, conducted as if she were not present, served to keep the spectre of death constantly before her while treating her as an object rather than a person deserving of basic human consideration. The few visitors she was permitted to receive were carefully selected to maximize her emotional distress. Former servants who had betrayed royal secrets to revolutionary authorities were brought to her cell to confront her with their testimony. These encounters, designed to appear as opportunities for human contact, actually served to deepen her isolation by demonstrating how thoroughly her former life had been dismantled and how completely those she had trusted had abandoned her cause. Even her attempts at maintaining dignity were turned against her. When she tried to keep her cell tidy or maintain some semblance of personal grooming, guards would deliberately mess her arrangements or mock her efforts as pretensions above her station. The message was clear. She no longer possessed the right to dignity, and any attempt to maintain self-respect would be met with ridicule and sabotage. The revolutionary calendar itself became a tool of psychological warfare. Each passing day brought new anniversaries of revolutionary victories or royal defeats that guards would celebrate loudly outside her cell. The execution date of her husband was marked with particular ceremony, as officials ensured she understood that she was following the same path that had led Louis XVI to the scaffold. These temporal markers served to structure her imprisonment around a narrative of inevitable doom. Physical exercise was severely restricted, not for security reasons, but to contribute to her physical deterioration. The combination of poor nutrition, lack of sunlight, and forced inactivity quickly began to show in her appearance. Her former vitality gave way to a gaunt weakness that satisfied revolutionary desires to see aristocratic power literally waste away. The woman who had once danced through the halls of Versailles now struggled to walk the few steps across her tiny cell. The temperature in her cell was deliberately maintained at uncomfortable levels, too cold in winter and stifling in summer. This climate control, achieved through manipulation of ventilation and heating, ensured that she never experienced physical comfort that might provide psychological relief. Every aspect of her environment was calibrated to maintain constant low-level stress that would gradually erode her mental defenses. Revolutionary authorities also understood the power of false accusation in breaking down resistance. She was regularly confronted with fabricated evidence of crimes she had never committed, forced to defend herself against charges that grew more absurd and numerous with each interrogation session. The futility of these defenses, given that her guilt was predetermined, served to demonstrate the complete hopelessness of her situation while exhausting her emotional resources through constant defensive responses to impossible allegations. The systematic destruction of Marie Antoinette's spirit reached new depths as her captors introduced what they termed revolutionary education. Guards would force her to listen to readings from radical pamphlets that described in graphic detail the alleged crimes of the monarchy, painting her as complicit in every act of oppression committed during centuries of royal rule. These sessions, conducted in the flickering candlelight of her cell, served no legal purpose but fulfilled the important revolutionary goal of forcing her to confront the full weight of popular hatred that had accumulated against the crown. The psychological manipulation became increasingly sophisticated as revolutionary officials recognized that simple physical discomfort was insufficient to achieve their goals. They began employing techniques designed to create cognitive dissonance, simultaneously treating her as both a dangerous enemy of the people and a pathetic remnant of a discredited system. This contradiction was carefully maintained to prevent her from settling into either the role of political prisoner or condemned criminal, keeping her psychologically unmoored and unable to develop effective coping strategies. Her interrogators employed a particularly insidious form of gaslighting, constantly questioning her memory of events and suggesting that her recollections were either deliberate lies or evidence of aristocratic delusion. They would present fabricated documents purporting to show her involvement in conspiracies she had never heard of, then express mock surprise at her denials. This technique served to undermine her confidence in her own perceptions, while creating an atmosphere where truth and falsehood became indistinguishable. The revolutionaries also understood the power of social isolation in breaking down individual resistance. They ensured that she received no news of her surviving children, leaving her to imagine the worst possible fates for those she loved most. When she asked about her daughter Marie-Thérèse or her young son Louis-Charles, guards would respond with cruel silence or vague hints that suggested terrible possibilities without providing definitive information. This uncertainty proved more torturous than confirmed bad news would have been. The manipulation of time became another weapon in their psychological arsenal. Clock sounds were deliberately muffled or eliminated from her cell environment, making it impossible for her to maintain any sense of daily rhythm. Meals arrived at irregular intervals that bore no relationship to normal meal times, creating a disorienting experience where day and night blended into an endless succession of uncomfortable hours. This temporal confusion was designed to break down her sense of reality and make her increasingly dependent on her captors for basic orientation. Revolutionary propaganda had created such a thorough demonization of Marie Antoinette that guards genuinely believed they were confronting an enemy of humanity itself. This sincere revolutionary fervor made their cruelty particularly effective, as it carried the conviction of moral righteousness. They were not simply following orders, but participating in what they saw as a sacred mission to cleanse France of aristocratic corruption. This ideological commitment gave their actions an intensity that purely professional jailers could never have achieved. The physical deterioration of her body became a source of perverse satisfaction for revolutionary observers. Regular reports were compiled documenting her declining appearance, noting with apparent pleasure how her former beauty was giving way to the gaunt features of prolonged suffering. These medical assessments served no therapeutic purpose but fulfilled the symbolic function of proving that aristocratic privilege could not protect against revolutionary justice. The woman who had once set fashion trends across Europe now served as an object lesson in the physical consequences of opposing the people's will. The denial of adequate clothing became another calculated humiliation. Her garments, already simple by her former standards, were allowed to deteriorate without replacement until they became little more than rags. The contrast between her current appearance and the elaborate gowns that had once made her the envy of European courts was deliberately maintained as a visual reminder of her complete fall from grace. Guards would sometimes mockingly address her as if she were still dressed in royal finery, adding psychological cruelty to physical discomfort. The revolutionaries employed what might be termed anticipatory mourning, constantly discussing her death as if it had already occurred. They would debate how her body should be disposed of after execution, whether her head should be displayed publicly, and what revolutionary celebrations would mark her demise. These conversations, conducted in her presence but as if she were already dead, served to strip away her sense of existing as a living person with agency and future possibilities. Her captors also understood the importance of destroying any sense of privacy or personal space that might provide psychological refuge. The constant surveillance was not merely about preventing escape, but about ensuring that she never experienced a moment of solitude where she might gather her thoughts or find inner strength. Every gesture, every expression, every whispered prayer was observed and often commented upon, creating a suffocating atmosphere where self-reflection became impossible. The Revolutionary Tribunal preparing her case deliberately leaked details of the charges against her, ensuring that she would hear about the accusations through prison gossip rather than official channels. This indirect communication served to heighten her anxiety while preventing her from preparing adequate responses to the allegations. The uncertainty about what exactly she would be accused of made it impossible to develop coherent defense strategies, leaving her psychologically unprepared for the legal proceedings that would seal her fate. Revolutionary authorities also employed false witnesses who claimed to have observed her committing various crimes against the French people. These testimonies, many obviously fabricated, were designed not to provide legal evidence, but to create an atmosphere where her guilt was assumed rather than proven. The parade of accusers served to demonstrate the breadth of popular anger against her, while making clear that her fate had been determined by forces far beyond any individual testimony or legal argument. The systematic degradation reached into every aspect of her daily existence, from the quality of light in her cell to the texture of the straw on which she slept. Revolutionary officials understood that human dignity depended on countless small comforts and courtesies that could be withdrawn one by one until nothing remained but basic survival. They proved remarkably thorough in identifying and eliminating every element of her environment that might provide psychological comfort or maintain connection to her sense of self-worth. The horrors inflicted upon Marie Antoinette during those 76 days in the conciergerie reveal the true face of revolutionary justice, stripped of its noble rhetoric about liberty and equality. What began as political necessity evolved into something far more sinister, a systematic campaign of dehumanization that transformed a woman into a symbol and then sought to destroy even that symbol through calculated cruelty. The revolutionaries achieved their goal of breaking her spirit, but in doing so, they exposed the capacity for brutality that lurks beneath the surface of any society convinced of its own righteousness. History has sanitized her story, transforming calculated torture into noble suffering, but the truth remains carved into the stone walls of that medieval prison, Marie Antoinette. Inette faced her final days not as the frivolous queen of popular imagination, but as a broken woman systematically stripped of every vestige of human dignity before being fed to the hungry crowds of revolutionary Paris. Her ordeal serves as a stark reminder that the line between justice and vengeance, between necessary change and gratuitous cruelty, remains perilously thin in times of social upheaval. The woman who once commanded Europe's most glittering court met her end as the revolutionaries intended, utterly destroyed in body and spirit, a cautionary tale written in suffering and sealed with blood.